So, as you know, we've got a pretty full house here, right?
Please
If
take your
everybody wants to
seats.
take a seat. We've asked for real direct answers because we have 50 minutes together, and we want to get to the heart of the conversation that Tumi and I were talking about, and His Excellency Bandu Al-Kuraev so expertly laid out for us in the opening comments. If I can start with you, Minister Al-Faleh, I was looking at the building blocks of various sectors, and it's good to have you on the panel because as the Minister of Investment, I talked about the different pillars driving future growth in the kingdom. It's quite extraordinary to think in one country you can have 6 giga projects and then have them as diverse as tourism to the mining industry. There was a mining law passed in 2021, but in the overarching theme of what needs to be done in the kingdom here, and His Excellency talked about trust, it's a combination of the ease of doing business, the right legislation, and not overlooking ESG, environmental social governance, to allow the global investors to feel comfortable when referring to trust to invest right now. When it comes to the mining sector, do you think that the formula is right in the collaboration you have within the cabinet to bring that global investment?
Well, thank you very much, John and Tumi, and let me just reiterate what His Excellency said, welcoming everyone. It's amazing to see so many people here physically and online, converging in Saudi Arabia, where we're connecting, as we discussed before the conference, north and south, east and west, and bringing decision makers, bringing investors, bringing advocates for a better future for humanity, whether it's an investment, as we saw in the FII, the best attended conference. A few weeks ago, my colleague, Minister of Tourism, Ahmed Al-Khatib, hosted here in this venue and in Riyadh, the world's largest gathering of tourism ministers. Today, we're talking mining and underpinning of all economic sectors, as correctly articulated by His Excellency Al-Kuraev. In a few weeks, we'll have biotech globally converging here in Saudi Arabia to find solutions for humanity in healthcare delivery and vaccines, biotech in general. And a few weeks later, we will have LEAP conference addressing technology, AI, and those enabling technologies that are also so critical to mining. So what we're doing in mining, and mining, by the way, in Kingdom, is integrated with industry. It's integrated with logistics under our biggest and most comprehensive vision realization program, NIDLIB, and it's of course integrated with the energy transition. The Kingdom is the world's safety valve for energy, whether it's conventional or going forward, unconventional or renewable energy, solar, wind, hydrogen, ammonia, in all of its colors, as well as any emerging technologies that are being researched, developed, deployed, and applied in mining and industry. I would just mention that the context of what we're meeting, as mentioned by His Excellency Al-Kuraev, is quite key. We're living in a world where there is both an expected tremendous rise in demand for mining in general, but certainly critical metals that will be key to electrification of the global economy, but there is also a critical shortage of supply, as well as concentration of supply, both in terms of where the mines are, as well as in the refining, processing, and delivery of the mines in terms of the supply chain re-engineering that is happening globally. With the energy transition, decarbonization, economic pressures with an impending recession, rising interest rates. You look at all of these factors, and you have to come rationally. Of course, I am biased, but I believe many of the attendees will agree that the region, Saudi Arabia in particular, has the potential to be part of the solution. Articulating policy, bringing collaboration, and the people we have here, discovering and availing the Arabian Shield in Saudi Arabia, but also integrating it with the Nubian Shield across the Red Sea in Africa, bringing further resources in Africa and play globally, as well as Central Asia, where I have been a few times in the last few years, and I know that they are hungry to collaborate with us and other places. Last plug, and I'll come back if there is time, the Kingdom has brought all of the necessary enablers together. We have the energy solution. We have the location, as I mentioned. We have the financing. We have best-in-class regulations across the board. But I have to give credit to His Excellency, Bandar al-Khrayef, and His Excellency, Khalid al-Mdaifer, for bringing together one of the world's most progressive mining laws into effect last year, as well as other enabling regulations. We have an investment law that will be coming out in 2023, as well as an environmental regulation that is both very progressive and enabling for the industry, but at the same time is going to allow us. ESG scores and rating for investors, it's going to be the highest in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, giving our carbon and low carbon intensity in fossil fuels, as well as the rising availability of renewable energy, including hydrogen, that will be a key reduction agent in processing of metals of different kind. And I predict in the years to come that the Kingdom will not only be the fastest growing country for mining in terms of bringing out the mineral resources that we're endowed with, just like we did with oil and gas, but taking it down into the value chain, just like we did with refining, petrochemicals, and advanced manufacturing in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
Thank you very much.
Your Excellency, you mentioned one important element, which I think if you're looking externally at business and the global environment, is how conducive the environment is in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for doing business. But if I can perhaps come to you, Dominic, there are two elements, I suppose. On the one hand, one could say, if you're looking specifically at the supply chain, you kind of need to do everything at once. The flip side says that may not always be possible. So which elements, in your view, from a business perspective or from a supply chain element perspective, are the lowest hanging fruit when looking at dealing with the supply resilience question specifically?
It's a great question. I was going to say everything, all of it.
But you can't say everything.
I know I can't. But I think it just, first of all, I just say I want to thank our hosts in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for convening everyone, because to me, that gets to the issue. This, I think, is one of the most critical issues of our time, is this gap. And you talk about resilience, it's for the world. We have a humongous gap between what we need, and if we're going to do the energy transition, to where we are. We're going to have to spend somewhere in the order of $275 trillion between now and 2050 if we want to meet the Paris climate goals. We have many others here, much more expertise than I am on it, but my simple number I look at, we're going to have to, as humans, up until today, we have discovered and processed about 700 million tons of copper. To meet the Paris climate objectives in the next 25 years, we're going to have to find another 700 million tons of copper. That's the kind of gap we're talking about. And that's where I think this confluence of it's mining, it's the environment, and energy all come together. So in doing that, I'm biased, but I think the critical area right now is actually being able to source those materials. It's one thing for Tesla and the EVs to talk about how, where we're moving, there's a consumer pull. But if we don't have these minerals, these critical minerals, we're not going to get there. And it's harder and harder to be able to find those minerals. And it's more difficult when you do find them to actually then be able to bring them into the system. So I recognize my biases. I think the most critical area is how we can find and be able to unlock and deliver that into the system.
It's a little bit like you read my mind, because Marna, I'd like to come to you. when you're talking about being able to access, off-take agreements can be one of the areas that's a bit challenging, because we've seen in the most recent past that when agreements are made in advance, it's not necessarily that there is always a shortage of supply in general. It's sometimes because the supply is already taken by someone else. How do we deal with that? Do we need to think differently about how we do off-take agreements?
So, to me, I think the offtake agreements are sort of at the back end of this process. If we look at exploration that Dominic was referring to, and what Ivanhoe went through as an example, we were in DRC for the past 26 years looking for the discovery of a copper asset, and we made that discovery. But as Robert would like to say, we became an overnight success after 26 years of hard work. It takes time to find these tier one assets, and then to develop them is even harder. We built this mine during the pandemic on time, on budget, which is unheard of. But it's because of collaboration with our host government. It's the ease of the policy, it's that continued dialogue. And it's also collaboration with the government. We had public-private partnerships in terms of bringing hydroelectricity to the mine. And then you get to ultimately selling your product. And we were fortunate because our offtake was with our partners. But the demand is so great that people are basically falling over themselves to get to the offtake. And how do you equitably distribute your offtake to ensure that all the countries have equal rights to these offtakes and have the ability to secure a local supply for themselves? And I think Saudi Arabia is very well placed in that regard to be a catalyst and a hub for distribution to other regions.
Well, it raises an interesting question, because the panel is about the resilience of supply chains and the shock that we suffered from the Ever Given getting stuck in the Suez Canal. It started there and got worse because of the pandemic. I think it'd be good, Jeremy Weir, if you can give us a sense from a global trading firm of whether globalization can be healed again, or is it truly the next wave of the next quarter century where regionalization is going to dominate, and you see the supply chains being rebuilt, and it offers an opportunity for the kingdom as a regional player from Africa to Central Asia. How do you see it early, post-pandemic, in that view?
Yeah, thank you, and a good question. And I would also like to thank our host for putting together this excellent forum. Before COVID started, we sort of, I think the focus really on supply chains was delivering materials at the lowest possible cost, and also extreme efficiencies and squeezing every dollar out of the supply chain. COVID highlighted a problem around logistics, about delays in ports, etc. like that. And then we had the conflict that we have in the Ukraine, which is further damaging, if you like, the supply chains in terms of we're getting regionalization, we're having political influences on supply chains, which is making it extremely complex. And on a forward-looking basis, we have certain regions which have very large processing and mining capabilities, and what this, if you like, these issues of COVID and the war in Ukraine has shown us is that countries and companies aren't willing to rely on single suppliers. They want multiple suppliers from multiple regions. They want to know where it comes from. And so therefore, this is placing a lot of pressure on the supply chains around the world, across the whole commodity spectrum. And to sort of say, are we going to be able to unwind and revert back to a pre-COVID level? Personally, I think that's going to be very, very difficult within the current environment. So therefore, we have a lot of pressures, on this particular aspect in terms of supply chains. I think the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is ideally placed. First of all, it's obviously developing a new industry, but more importantly, from a mining point of view, it's obviously has a great vision, but also it has energy. And we also need to focus not just on the mining side, but also on the mineral processing side, because there's extreme deficits in some metals in terms of the metal processing capacities. So therefore, as a country, in terms of where it's geographically located, the energy supply, but also in terms of the financial aspects and the governance within the country provides, if you like, an excellent forum and a platform for this to be addressed.
Good. If time permits, it would be good to get into the geopolitics, because the number 1 and 2 powers of the world are asking the kingdom to take sides, for example, when it comes to energy, and can it maintain that balance between 2 superpowers? Robert, I've got an instinct for news, and so does Tumi, but Am I correct in saying Ma'aden as a giant mining company and Ivanhoe Electric, Marna was talking to me about it behind the stage, when we talk about collaboration between countries, this is the real deal, is it not? It's rolling out today. You want to elaborate, and Tumi can pick it up with you.
Sure. So I'd like to welcome everybody to what I would consider my new home as the adopted son of Saudi Arabia. I've been here a year now, and you said it right, Jeremy, when you said a country with energy. And I don't know that you meant the kind of energy that I'm so passionate about that I see in Saudi Arabia, but Saudi Arabia is a country on the move, obviously, in massive transformation. And as the third pillar of the economy, we've got to keep up at Ma'aden. And we know we can't do it alone. And so what we've done this year is we've gone out and we've talked to the best and brightest in the mining field and exploration. We're expanding a partnership with Barrick. We've already got an existing partnership, and we're quadrupling the size of the exploration lands we're exploring with Barrick. We'll be announcing that today. We're acquiring 10% of Ivanhoe Electric. That's got a proprietary technology that we desperately need in the kingdom to help unearth the potential and find out what the true mineral resources are. And so we'll have a joint venture in exploration with Ivanhoe, among 20 other MOUs we're signing today. So the country's on the move, the company as the third pillar is on the move. Collaboration is absolutely required, and we are definitely open for business.
You're going to talk about collaboration in just a bit, but I think what's important when you're talking about the country being on the move, it's all good and well to have rapid growth, but you need people to work.
Absolutely.
You need people to have particular skills in order to deliver on that mandate. Can you talk, I know you're very passionate about people,
Sure.
You're very passionate about ESG, but can you talk a little bit about your thinking and your strategy around how you ensure that the business imperatives are driven and met by a suitably skilled workforce?
Absolutely. I think I'm the absolute wrong person to interpret dance. But the interpretive dance today, I think, summed up the transition that the world needs to think about with mining. You have a bunch of dirty males started the dance. And by the time it was over, it was a diverse, unique, jazzy looking group, right? So we've got to change.
So.
We've got to change the perception that it's not a dirty, heavy, remote industry. It's got to attract the best and brightest. So one of the things I'm passionate about with Ma'aden is making us the employer of choice in the kingdom.
Yeah.
I need to triple the size of my workforce just to meet our ambitious targets. I can't do that if people think it's too hard, it's too hot, it's too far away. We've got to deploy technology, we've got to improve the employee value proposition, we've got to improve the image, we've got to get to the kids. So it is a very full court press for Ma'aden right now to build the engine that is going to be capable organizationally with the right people to deliver this.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be an interesting. Don't look so confused, John. I think you're still thinking about the interpretive dance. But I think it's going to be a really
I
interesting
love
challenge.
this great interpretation. I mean, let alone I can't do it on the stage, but to interpret it in that sort of Freudian way, I was very impressed, Robert. That's what I got to say. I wanted to pick it up with Minister Al-Faleh on this, and it's a conversation we've had at the FII, for example. It's extraordinary to think, and it was in my opening comments, how do you have the bandwidth to, say, take on 6 gigaprojects at the same time, and then you need employees at mid-level and entry level to come into the tourism sector? The diversification away from hydrocarbons and bringing into the renewable space, you need that sort of expertise. And in mining, as Bob was saying, and we're going to be probably adding, 3 to 5 domestic mining companies just to keep up with the exploration that's taking place here. From a Ministry of Investment standpoint, what are you looking for from the global CEOs that are at the table here? When they come in, do you have that, we want to train the Saudi workforce for the future at the same time? How do you get the balance of be able to have the domestic bandwidth to grow? Because it's a challenge.
Well, if you look at the kingdom's recent history over the last 8 decades, it's been a record of multitasking, bringing the best that Saudi Arabia has with the best that the world has together, fusing them into a workforce, into an investment environment, joint venturing, collaborating, working together in a very open, transparent, pro-business ecosystem that, quite frankly, is much better today than it was a few years ago with the Vision 2030, but in reality, it's been in existence since the creation of the modern Saudi Arabia we know. Multitasking is not new to Saudi Arabia. We built the oil industry, we built the petrochemical industry, we built one of the world's best infrastructure. I was chatting with His Excellency Al Jasser in the audience about what they've done in transportation. Saudi Arabia today is ranked #1 in terms of the Global Road Connectivity Index. We have 5,000 kilometers, 5,500 kilometers of rail, and we have 8,000 kilometers of rail that are being tendered out today that will be built. We have over 40 industrial estates, including large ones that are focused on specific industry, and some of them are focused on mining and minerals, and more to become. And within the strategies that have been launched, there are significant amount of capital allocated to providing that physical infrastructure. Digital infrastructure is key to automation, to connectivity, to logistics today, and Saudi Arabia ranks in the top 5 or 10 in all of the digital indicators. We talked about regulations. We talked about a government that is together 24/7, and
You're not kidding.
I'm not kidding. We're together 24/7. I know as much about what's happening in tourism as the Minister of Tourism, and vice versa in terms of what we're doing in the investment environment. The same with industry and mining and energy. And I think the key thing for doing all of these multitasking, growing all of our sectors simultaneously, is we're empowering the private sector. So to all of our colleagues in the audience, international and domestic alike, equal, you're in charge, essentially. We're providing the ecosystem, we're providing the regulatory enablers, we're providing some financing enablers through the development fund, through the PIF co-investing, but really we're unleashing the power of the private sector, the power of our young people through innovation, a startup ecosystem that is taking place, and we're embracing technology and change more than anybody else. So what we heard about Ivanhoe with Ma'aden is only the latest example. What His Excellency is doing with the exploration program, airborne, ground level exploration that's been going on for a few years, immediately loading the data on our database, making it available to the private sector. All of these enablers, I think, are going to allow the mining sector, as Bob said, to be the third pillar of our industrialization, while building tourism, while building biotech, while enabling AI to activate all of the key sectors.
To make it easier.
Yes.
Marna, if I can come to you. The minister is speaking a little bit there about this broader coordination effort and this desire by states to ensure that the environment is conducive, not just from a legislative perspective, but an infrastructure perspective. Your experience predominantly on the African continent, you gave an example of the DRC. Let's talk a little bit in the context of the African Continental Free Trade Area, the AFCFTA, and what needs to happen in the context of improving the system to ensure that there is improved supply chain resilience on the continent. Because getting around, I mean, you know, having to leave from Johannesburg to go via this to get to Morocco or whatever, isn't going to help the effort.
Yes, no, agreed to me, and we touched on this a bit last night when we met, and one of the biggest challenges we faced when we brought Kamoa-Kakula into production was getting our product to market, and Jeremy and his team here on my left have been very helpful in terms of solving our problems as well. But One thing that's really missing within the African continent is collaboration between the different countries, specifically towards logistics, rail solutions, etc. And I think the kingdom could also play a catalyst role there in terms of investment into infrastructure to create this regional hub and get everything connected. I mean, if we look at what's happening in Europe, everything's connected. When you go and visit Paris, you can get to London in a train, in a speed train, in 2 hours. But we don't have a similar system in Africa. And I think that's one of the key parts that's missing. And with all the ministers here today, I think that's something that if Africa could focus on getting us interconnected, it helps with big infrastructure projects, and it helps with getting our product into market.
But I suppose, Jeremy, this leads to the question of broader international cooperation as well, right? So we can speak about what individual states are doing. We can talk about what needs to happen in this country, what needs to happen. But overall, and particularly in the future mineral context, if we don't have a broader coordination and we don't have a broader cooperation, again, we're not going to not only hit targets, we're fundamentally going to fail in terms of creating a more sustainable future.
Look, we have an issue. If you even look at the current issues we have now, okay, I'll move to a slightly different industry, on the oil industry. We've increased the number of barrels of oil floating on the water by 200 million barrels, simply because of the sanctions in place and where oil, it's not moving efficiently. In the African states, you know, it is a problem. A lot of the materials which are moving, mine production are moving out of the DRC and the copper belt is done by road. And that's extremely, it has a terrible carbon footprint, has a, you know, impact on society, and is not efficient. You know, we actually were recently awarded a tender to manage the railway line across Angola from Lobito to Lolo, when they were trying to connect that into the DRC. That has the potential within a few years or 5 years to move 1.5 million tonnes. But that does require coordination across states, and it's very important that we successfully implement this for efficiency, but also for the impact on society, you know, to really reduce carbon footprints and get, you know, if you like, trucks off the road. So it does require a lot of collaboration.
Good. We wanted to deal with some of the major global trends that are taking place here, and I think it would be interesting to have our CEOs address this issue of, should the mining industry, we had this conversation behind the stage, be bolder in saying, look, you need these resources to have a successful energy transition. So there's resilience in the supply chain, but there's also this debate that's taking place on the global level where the mining industry said, I'll stay behind the scenes here. I don't want to ruffle any feathers. And we'll let the environmentalists do one thing, the manufacturers do the rest, and we'll just stay in our camp. Do we need to change that narrative, in your view, Dominic? And how bold should the industry be?
I think we have to be very bold. I mean, I'm a relative newcomer to the industry, but it's amazing to see that gap, that there's actually mining somehow is doing something wrong, and then there's the environment, and there's actually this critical linkage. It gets back to the, you know, we need these minerals, critical minerals, or we're not going to make the energy transition. We're part and parcel, but the image, it's Stone Age image. And I think, and we need to do everything we can to try and explain that to people, to be able to see how it actually works, to be able to have people understand what it is that we do. I mean, I must say, when I saw the dancers coming out at first, I thought it might have been, you know, what is it, Extinction Revolution, a group coming in to protest.
Rebellion.
Rebellion, Extinction Rebellion. But I think that there's a very big job to be done on that side, because it can't be separate. It's actually integrated. And obviously mining companies themselves are doing a lot. All of us have bold goals, I think, on being net zero by 2050, wanting to do everything we can effectively. But that's one part of it. The other part we really need to get out there to explain to people is the importance of what we do to be able to make that transition happen. And that gets a bit to the talent. The last thing I would just say is, we have a shortage of talent globally. So being in the UK, you're seeing university after university stop mining programs, right? And this is a time actually when we need it. The geologists, the hydrogeophysicists, the material sciences, these are teaching earth sciences. So people, this is This is an industrial revolution scale thing, but the image of the industry, it's not what some people say, oh, I want to be a mining engineer. We need to attract talent, and we need to be able to make industry and government broadly understand the role that we play, because it's getting harder and harder to do what we do.
So. Very quickly, Marna, you were nodding as we saw Dominic replying there, and we should ask, because they've unleashed the power of women in this country to work. You're a young president of a major mining company. That's part of the equation. How do you address this issue about the role of the mining industry to attract talent, but also be bolder on policy so you don't have to hide anymore?
Yeah, so I think it's first and foremost to educate around what mining entails. When I started off in mining, my perception as a young 20-year-old was that you need to dig dirt underground. And if I take what we do today, it's sophisticated. It's technology. There's a lot of social work. There's the human touch to it. And the software in mining is a lot more important than the hardware in mining, especially in the areas where we operate. It's about looking after your communities, looking after your host governments. So there's a lot of ancillary work to mining that people don't really recognize when it comes to mining. And it's communicating that through. And then when it comes to the technical expertise, it's about getting people to understand that if it wasn't for mining, you wouldn't be holding the cell phone in which you rally people to come to your protest, to protest for climate change. So people need to start making that link to raw materials and need to understand that if we want these nice big screens upstage, we need to be pro-mining, but responsible pro-mining. And it's about mining for a greater purpose. And that's how we try and attract talent. That's how we go out to people. In Africa, people are hungry for work. We go out and people approach us to come and work for us. We're a young entrepreneurial company. People see that we are doing things differently. We work closely with our communities. We give shares to our communities. And that's how you attract people to be part of your success story. And then they want to learn. We do our training on site, and all our mines are operated by locals. If you go to our mine in the DRC, the big mining equipment, locals. And it's not a mining jurisdiction that's well known for underground mining. It's mostly open pit. We've trained all our operators ourselves. So it's doable, but it's about approaching it the right way and making the industry sexy again.
Good.
Marna has shared a little bit about what responsible mining looks like for her in her environment. What does it look like for you with Martin?
Exactly the same. I mean, one of the good parts about ESG and mining is international standards exist. The playbook's already been written. So what good looks like in South Africa or the Congo or the US or Canada or Saudi Arabia, the standards are established. So it's just a matter of executing against them. So I think there's not a whole lot of difference in jurisdiction. Now you get into some subtleties and the nuances on how you navigate those different jurisdictions, but the technical aspect of mining is universal in how you do it well.
Jeremy, I'd like to talk a little bit, if I may, about the broader ESG question, because that's sort of where we are right now. Globally, the regulatory space is becoming quite very nuanced and quite specific, ensuring that the environment is taken care of, that you are appropriately dealing with your social responsibility, that governance is intact and nobody's doing anything untoward. That can feel quite onerous for organizations, not just from a national perspective, but in a global business environment. How do organizations ensure that they're able to marry that onerous nature of the regulatory environment with an ability to be agile, with an ability to move, with an ability to easily access resources to ensure that supply chains are in fact resilient and sustainably so?
I think it's important to understand that while you conform with regulations and we have our compliance departments and monitoring these things, is that actually it's a license to operate. In today's society, our customers are actually saying, when they're acquiring materials via us, where does it come from? How's it produced? Where's it produced? What's the carbon footprint? What are the ESG components? What the regulatory environment around what you're delivering to us as part of the KYC process? So what we're seeing now is actually the consumer and society demanding these things. And so you have regulatory oversight, so be it, you conform. Okay, so therefore, but what is important, I think it actually is good for the industry in the fact that the industry is moving with these standards, is actually promoting these standards and saying this is the proper governance associated with the delivery of material, the production and delivery of materials to the end consumer. And I think this is not going to change. Now, there are certain, if you like, there's certain regions, countries, etc., which have different standards. That's understandable because there's different forms of development. But I think we're going to see, so if you like, consolidation over a period of time. And you also got to remember that if you're particularly talking about the banking markets, the capital providers, the equity markets, these are standards which are required, so companies will have to conform.
Good. We talked about trust. We heard the comments from His Excellency Minister Al-Karayev. And then in this era of post-COVID, a conflict with Russia and Ukraine, I think the other one we need to deal with is how do you build resilience? You had to have resilience in healthcare after the pandemic and trust to deliver vaccines and to make the right decisions. How does it apply to the kingdom in terms of building resilience for manufacturing, for the banking system, for cybersecurity? I know these are all key issues today, but you have a resilience initiative, and how does it fit in to the conversation as you try to build the mining sector?
Well, within the domestic economy, we always anticipate what kind of shocks we could experience, whether they're internal or external, and build systems and strategic reserves for oil, for products, for electricity capacity, connectivity with the region. We build resilience into our human resource planning. But I think importantly, in this context of this conference and on mining, metals, and manufacturing, we have launched as part of the National Investment Strategy, and it really is a bridge also with the National Manufacturing Strategy, an initiative that was launched by His Royal Highness the Crown Prince in October called GISRI, the Global Initiative for Supply Chain Resilience, and it attempts to bring all of the capabilities of the kingdom to be in the service of global supply chain resilience. So our location, our energy, our macroeconomic stability, our cost advantage, where we believe the kingdom will be a first quartile in terms of lowest cost. We will be, as I mentioned, the lowest in emissions and overall ESG score, given where renewables will be introduced in mining and manufacturing. It will be underpinned by a strong regulations, which we already talked about, but equally important, there will be a financial incentive program available to global industry to come here and use, and some special economic zones that are being planned and will be launched in the next few weeks, that will be designed around the needs of the industry to bring minerals from the kingdom, minerals from the region, have massive refining, processing, manufacturing, value add, and then ship the products either as final or intermediate products into global supply chain, taking advantage of what I believe is the most competitive nation for mining, processing, and manufacturing.
Right, you could not say as the business as usual post-pandemic, for sure. Right, that was a shock of a lifetime.
No, I think it's definitely not business as usual. And the point that I'd like to come back to a little bit was this view of having to think differently about the space of mining, particularly in the context of women, because there's only one woman on the panel, gentlemen, so can you give us a second on this?
Well, with the exception of the co-host.
Well, I'm not a panelist, so I don't count. But I would like to talk about this for a moment. The reality is, and we've seen this in business broadly speaking, When there are women in the business, when there are women in the boardroom, when there are women involved as equal partners in a business environment, business does better. The bottom line improves, efficiency potentially improves, et cetera, et cetera. That particular question, though, Marna, without necessarily making it seem daunting, for a lot of women, how do you, in your environment, begin to have that conversation with women who may never have considered this industry otherwise?
It is daunting, and I think any industry or any career that you pursue as a female is a decision that you have to make, that you're going to work hard to pursue a goal, whether that be in mining or a different industry. I think that's the first sort of tick box to tick. The second tick box is, you know, there's sort of biological factors for us. Do you want to be a mom? I'm a mom. I've got 3 boys. And I decided from the onset, I wanted it all. I want a family, but I also want a career. And when you make that decision, you also have to make certain sacrifices. Yes, I didn't have the luxury of having a 12-month maternity leave break because I've always been in an executive position and I've always had to move around, but I had resources at home that help me with the kids, and in my off time I'm with my children. So it's communicating to females that you can set yourselves up to be able to pursue different interests. You don't have to just fall into a single box. And I think that's the secret. The other thing, just going back to more success in the workplace, I think having females in the workplace definitely helps, but it's about diversity. I've seen in the areas where we operate, having different cultural viewpoints in the boardroom really changes perspectives. You know, you don't realize it because you have your own preconceived ideas, but when you start spitballing ideas around the boardroom table, and there's somebody from a completely different background offering their views, sometimes you come up with the perfect solution. And that's where females and males, but also diversity, different cultures, bring a lot to the boardroom table. And I think it's about encouraging that conversation around the table and getting different perspectives. So hopefully we can entice more females to mining, make it a bit more attractive to females to go into mining. I think with the big focus on ESG, there's already a natural movement towards that. And then also with technology, it's a bit of a new deal for females because new technology brings new opportunities for females to participate in this industry.
I think the point that you make about general diversity is absolutely key. The reality of the matter is that most people who work, certainly in executive roles in this industry, are male, which means that it's not just about women thinking differently about their role in the industry, but business itself thinking differently about women in the industry.
Absolutely. If you think about, I mean, I tell my team, they get tired of me saying it, but 50% of the population's female and 100% of my offspring are female. So figure out which of those 2 metrics you're shooting for in your department or your team, and that's what I want. But so we're moving fast. You know, His Excellency Khalid Ahmad-Dafer and I have established a Women in Mining Forum in Saudi Arabia. We've just appointed a new board director, female. So now 20% of my board is female. I just appointed a new HR lead, female. New board secretary and head of governance, female. So we are putting we're backing our aspirations with actions and driving that. Now, where I worry about, though, is filling the pipeline with the young Marnas, the 6th, 7th grade girls that want to go into mining. That's where we need them. So we need process engineers, we need technical people.
Yeah, well, the transformation in the last 5 years, I'm sure, Bob, as you've noticed in the last year, has been nothing short of a revolution in terms of female participation. We have 5 minutes left to me, and I was thinking in the context of going from the sand, the desert, to the snow, because I think many of these participants are going to be in Davos, and they always like to look at the crystal ball in Davos about the greatest risks. So I don't think we can talk about the mining industry in isolation. I don't know if you want to share with me and Tumi the greatest risk to the mining sector as a result of the downturn we're going to see in 2023. We've got to be very quick. We only have 5 minutes. Do you want to give us a minute on that, and we'll ask Dominic, and Tumi can riff with you as well.
You know, I think rising interest rates will raise the cost, obviously, for the trillions of dollars that Dominic mentioned and others that need to come into mining, but the imperative of bringing resources, financial, human, management, technology, and regulatory together is absolutely dominant, and we have to find a way. So we need to make sure the financial intermediation industry, equity, credit, capital in general is available and doesn't slow us down any further, because we're already behind schedule in terms of meeting the requirements that we have.
It's interesting if you think about the last 12 years, right? Financial crisis, pandemic, oil gyrations, fears of recession, and then a conflict between Russia and Ukraine. How do you see the risk, Dominic, in 2023?
I'm going to try and bundle some, if that's all right. I totally agree on the interest rates and so forth. I think that what I worry about is short-termism, that we're a long-term industry. We're 20 to 30 years out. And the danger is we stop or we block. We don't have enough projects going on right now to even get close to meeting that gap that we talked about at the beginning. And short-term pressures can block that, and then we're going to pay massive costs. So I worry about short-termism in a fundamental industry that's long-term, and that pressure affecting investors, affecting companies in terms of how we think about things, and affecting governments in terms of how they work. So short-termism is what I worry most about.
Marna?
Yes, I would definitely agree with Dominic. I think it's about getting the pipelines out, and that's very difficult in an environment where it's not conducive for investment into new mining projects. And I think stability, global stability, that's one of the big key factors. We see what's happening between the US and China, and I don't think that is positive, and that could have a big impact on the mining industry.
Jeremy?
We've got a serious problem at the moment in terms of the available metal right now is the tightest it's been ever in terms of weeks of consumption across the entire spectrum. And I think there's a sort of a view that I suppose there's from society that we can just turn a switch on, and this is getting back to the long-term scenario. You can't turn the switch on. This is long-term planning, and therefore we need to address this problem now. Now, we are starting to see that from governments, I believe. In Europe and the US, we're starting to see the need to try and reform to some degree. But the fact is that we've got a pretty critical stage here at the moment. My concern is actually increased, if you like, political instability in the current environment is going to further inhibit the expansion of the metals industry and the mining industry, and really push us into sort of extreme price levels, which is not good for anybody.
No, it says the underinvestment. Bob, do you have to manage expectations in mining? Marna was kind of indicating that you do need patience. Dominic touched upon that. But at the same time, we want to create 200,000 jobs in this sector. So does it derail what the kingdom's trying to do in mining, or is it full speed ahead in your view?
I think if you look at the short-termism is the biggest risk with commodity risk. So when prices fall down, what do we cut in mining companies? Exploration and people development.
Yeah.
And we've just spent the last 45 minutes talking about the importance of exploration and people development.
I know.
So that, and I've met with Amin Nasser, the CEO of Aramco. And I don't know how long he's been there, but 20, 30 years. He says, we've never cut exploration or people. It's not considered discretionary at Aramco. So that's the view we're taking at Modern now, is exploration and people are not discretionary variable costs based on the commodity prices. They're key and fundamental to our success.
I think it's certainly been, we've run out of time pretty much. I was about to ask another question and I realized I'm about to add 10 minutes to this conversation. But I think what's been really interesting, certainly from a risk perspective, and I'd like to just emphasize this notion about longer term thinking. And Excellency, if I could end with you. We've seen that evidenced in Saudi Arabia over the last couple of years. It is all about long-term thinking. It's all about long-term sustainability. But equally, there are two fundamental things that have to happen short-term, or a number, but let's pick two that you would identify that have to happen short-term in order to make long-term possible. What is the too short for you?
For Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
Well, I think the first one is for the private sector to jump on the bandwagon, especially the international private sector. When I speak with investors, they believe in the vision. They believe in the fundamentals of the kingdom. But the FDI flow has not started flowing sufficiently enough to take advantage of the opportunities that are available in Saudi Arabia. So I'm encouraged by the presence here, the presence of NFII and other conferences, but we want to see investments hitting the ground and deals happening. And you know, the other short-term thing that we need to do is global stability. I mean, we're praying for peace. We see conflicts physically in terms of the war in Europe, but we're also seeing a lot of tension globally in terms of East-West, tensions, and we're hoping that the wisdom of global leaders will bring us stability and peace. We're starting a new year, and we're praying to God and also hoping that that stability will set in this new year.
Inshallah.
Good. I sat at dinner last night with a Turkish steelmaker who's making their first visit here, and they said they have meetings with you today about ramping up FDI. But wait, $8 billion into the mining sector is not bad, so I have to congratulate you and Ms. Al-Krayev. What a fantastic discussion. What a pleasure to share the stage with you.
Likewise.
Can we give a nice round of applause
Absolutely.
to our distinguished guests on the panel?
To all of you, thank you so very much. It's been really enlightening, and I think a great start to the next couple of days of discussions. Let's keep the energy going.
Yeah, nicely
Let's
done.
keep the discussions going. Thank you to each of you.